The champagne glass slipped from my fingers, shattering across the polished hardwood floor of the country club. Everyone turned to stare, but I barely noticed. My son's fiancée, Rebecca, had just leaned in close during the rehearsal dinner toast, her breath warm against my ear, and whispered 5 words that would change everything. Check his basement, Patricia. Now, I'm Patricia Thornton, and at 58 years old, I thought I'd seen enough of life to not be surprised anymore. I'd raised my son Daniel alone after my husband Mark died in a construction accident when Daniel was only 12. Those were hard years, scraping by on insurance money and working double shifts at the hospital as a nurse. But I'd done it. I'd gotten Daniel through high school, helped him get his business degree, watched him build a successful career in real estate development. And now, just 2 days before his wedding to Rebecca Chun, a brilliant architect he'd met at a property development conference, everything I thought I knew was crumbling around me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca pulled away from me quickly, her smile never faltering as she raised her own glass to the crowd of 70 guests gathered to celebrate the upcoming wedding. She was stunning in a navy silk dress, her black hair swept into an elegant updo, every inch the composed bride. But her hand was trembling as she held that champagne flute, and when our eyes met across the room, I saw something there that made my blood run cold. Fear. No, not just fear. Terror. I excused myself from the table, mumbling something about needing air, and made my way through the French doors onto the terrace. The September evening was cool, the sun just beginning to set over the manicured golf course beyond. My mind was racing. Check his basement. What could possibly be in Daniel's basement that would warrant such a cryptic warning? And why would Rebecca, who seemed so in love with my son, be the one to tell me? Daniel and Rebecca had been together for 2 years. I'd watched their relationship bloom from those early dating months when Daniel couldn't stop talking about this amazing woman he'd met, through their engagement last Christmas when he'd proposed on a beach in Maui. Rebecca had always been kind to me, respectful, warm. We'd gone wedding dress shopping together. She'd asked for my input on flowers and centerpieces. She'd even invited me to be part of the ceremony, doing a reading from Corinthians about love. So why was she warning me about my own son? I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and stared at Daniel's contact information. My finger hovered over the call button, but something stopped me. If Rebecca had wanted me to confront Daniel directly, she would have said so. Instead, she told me to check the basement. She wanted me to see something for myself. Daniel lived in a beautiful restored Victorian in the historic district of Ashwood, about 20 minutes from where the rehearsal dinner was being held. He'd bought the house 3 years ago, one of his first major personal investments after his real estate business started really taking off. The house had been a disaster when he'd purchased it, practically condemned, but Daniel had seen its potential. He'd spent months renovating it himself, doing much of the work with his own hands. He was so proud of that house. I'd been there dozens of times, of course. Sunday dinners, holiday gatherings, casual drop-ins when I was in the neighborhood. But now I realized something odd. In all those visits in 3 full years, Daniel had never once shown me the basement. Every time I'd asked about it, he'd brushed it off. Still working on it, Mom. It's a mess down there. Nothing to see yet. I'd accepted those explanations without question because why wouldn't I? He was my son. I trusted him completely. The rehearsal dinner dragged on for another 2 hours. I went through the motions, smiling at the appropriate moments, laughing at the best man stories about Daniel's college days, hugging relatives I hadn't seen in years. But my mind was elsewhere, counting down the minutes until I could leave and drive to that house. Rebecca avoided me for the rest of the evening. Whenever I tried to catch her eye, she was suddenly engaged in conversation with someone else, pulled away by a bridesmaid, needed urgently by the wedding planner. Daniel, meanwhile, was in his element. He gave a beautiful speech about how Rebecca had changed his life, how he couldn't wait to start their future together, how grateful he was to everyone who'd supported them. He looked so happy, so genuinely full of joy, that I almost convinced myself I'd misheard Rebecca's whisper. Maybe she'd said check his Facebook or check his bass guitar or something equally innocuous that I'd misunderstood in the noise of the party. But then I caught Rebecca watching Daniel from across the room, and the expression on her face told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't looking at him with love or excitement or even pre-wedding jitters. She was looking at him with something between pity and disgust, and when she noticed me watching her watch him, she quickly turned away and disappeared into the restroom. I followed her. The ladies' room at the country club was all marble and gold fixtures, completely empty when I pushed through the door. Rebecca was standing at the sink, gripping the edges of the counter so hard her knuckles were white. "Rebecca," I said quietly, "what's in the basement?" She didn't turn around. Her reflection in the mirror looked 10 years older than the vibrant young woman who'd walked in. "I can't tell you, Patricia. You have to see it yourself. You have to understand what kind of man he really is." "What kind of man?" I felt my voice rising and forced myself to stay calm. "Rebecca, you're marrying him in 2 days. If there's something I need to know about my son, you need to tell me right now." Finally, she turned to face me. Her eyes were red, though I hadn't seen her cry. "I thought I loved him." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I thought he was perfect. Successful, kind, attentive. He treated me like a queen. And then last week, I forgot my phone at his house and went back to get it. He was at a property showing, so I used my key to let myself in. My heart was pounding now. And I heard something. From the basement." Rebecca wrapped her arms around herself. At first I thought it was the TV, maybe he'd left something on. But then I realized the sound was coming from downstairs. So I opened the basement door and I went down there, and Patricia, I saw things. Things that made me understand that I don't know your son at all. None of us do. Before I could press her further, the bathroom door swung open and 2 of Rebecca's bridesmaids came in, laughing about something one of the groomsmen had said. Rebecca immediately straightened up, wiping under her eyes and forcing a smile. She gave me one last meaningful look, and then swept past me out of the restroom, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. The rehearsal dinner finally ended around 10. I hugged Daniel goodbye, holding on perhaps a bit longer than normal, studying his face for any sign of the monster Rebecca seemed to think he was. But I saw only my son, the boy who'd cried for 3 days after his hamster died. The teenager who'd worked 2 jobs to help with household expenses after Mark passed. The young man who'd called me every Sunday without fail, no matter how busy he got. "I love you, Mom," he said as we parted in the parking lot. "Thank you for everything you've done for me. For believing in me even when things were hard." "I love you too, sweetheart." My voice cracked slightly and he squeezed my hand. "Hey, you okay? You seem off tonight. Just emotional about my baby getting married." I forced a smile. "You know how mothers are." He laughed and kissed my forehead. "Get some rest. Big day coming up." I watched him walk to his car, his arm around Rebecca's waist, and felt a wave of nausea. What was I about to discover? And how would it change everything I thought I knew about my only child? I didn't go home. Instead, I drove straight to Daniel's house, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. The Victorian loomed before me in the darkness, its gingerbread trim and wraparound porch looking almost sinister in the glow of the streetlights. Daniel's car wasn't there. Good. He'd mentioned something about going out with his groomsmen after the dinner, probably wouldn't be home until late. I had a key. Daniel had given it to me when he'd first bought the place, insisted I have it in case of emergencies. I'd never used it to enter his home without permission before, but Rebecca's words echoed in my head. "You have to see it yourself. You have to understand what kind of man he really is." The house was dark and quiet when I let myself in. I stood in the foyer for a moment, my heart hammering, half expecting Daniel to appear and ask what I was doing there. But the house remained still. I turned on lights as I moved through the first floor, everything exactly as I remembered it. The living room with its restored fireplace and comfortable leather furniture. The kitchen with its modern appliances and butcher block counters that Daniel had installed himself. The dining room where we'd shared so many meals. And then I was standing in front of the basement door. It was tucked away at the end of the first floor hallway, just past the powder room. An ordinary white door with an ordinary brass knob. I'd stood in front of this door before, asking Daniel what he'd done with the basement space, and he'd always deflected. Now my hand hovered over that knob, and I realized I was terrified of what I might find on the other side. I thought about calling the police. But what would I tell them? My son's fiancée told me to check his basement and now I'm scared? They'd think I was crazy. And if Rebecca was wrong, If there was some innocent explanation for whatever had frightened her, I'd have ruined Daniel's life over nothing. I opened the door. The basement stairs were steep and wooden, creaking under my weight as I descended. I fumbled for a light switch and found one at the bottom of the stairs. Fluorescent lights flickered on, revealing a space that took my breath away. The basement was enormous, spanning the entire footprint of the house. But that wasn't what shocked me. It was what filled the space. Photographs. Hundreds, maybe thousands of photographs covering every wall. But these weren't normal photos. They were surveillance images. Pictures taken from a distance through windows from hiding spots. And they were all of women. Different women, dozens of them, captured going about their daily lives. Walking to their cars. Sitting in cafes. Shopping at the grocery store. Entering their homes.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I moved closer to the nearest wall, my legs trembling. The photos were organized meticulously, grouped by subject. Each woman had her own section, and beneath the photos were notes. Handwritten observations about their schedules, their habits, their routines. Sarah M., 32, works at Riverside Bank, leaves for work at 7:45 every morning, stops at Starbucks on 3rd Street, returns home by 6:30 unless it's Thursday when she has yoga at the gym on Maple Avenue. My stomach lurched. This was a stalker's lair. But it was worse than that because as I moved along the walls, I started recognizing some of the women. Karen Phillips, who worked at the flower shop downtown. Jessica Reynolds, a teacher at the elementary school. Amanda Torres, who owned the bakery on Main Street. These weren't random women. They were women from Ashwood. Women from our community. And then I saw Rebecca. Her section was larger than the others, more detailed. Photos of her going back 2 years, since before she and Daniel had even officially met. Pictures of her at her architecture firm, at her apartment building, at the coffee shop she frequented. Notes about her preferences, her schedule, her friends. Everything Daniel would need to orchestrate a seemingly chance encounter that would appear completely natural. Their meeting hadn't been an accident at a conference. It had been planned, calculated, staged. Daniel had been stalking Rebecca for months before he'd approached her, learning everything about her so he could become exactly the kind of man she'd fall in love with. I sank down onto the stairs trying to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be my son. Daniel was good. Daniel was kind. Daniel was the boy I'd raised to respect women, to value honesty, to treat people with dignity. But the evidence was overwhelming. And it got worse. In the center of the basement was a workbench, and on that workbench was a laptop. I opened it with shaking hands and it was unlocked. The screen showed a grid of windows, each window showing a different camera feed. I leaned closer and felt my blood turn to ice. These were live feeds from inside women's homes. Bedrooms, living rooms, bathrooms. I could see women right now, in real time, completely unaware they were being watched. One woman was reading in bed. Another was watching TV on her couch. A third was getting ready for bed in her bathroom, and I quickly averted my eyes from that screen, feeling sick. Daniel had somehow installed hidden cameras in these women's homes. He was watching them constantly, invading the most private moments of their lives. And from the dates in the corner of each feed, some of these cameras had been active for years. I clicked through files on the laptop and found folders going back nearly a decade. Hundreds of women. Thousands of photos and videos. Detailed notes on their lives. Daniel hadn't just done this to Rebecca. He'd been doing this for years, systematically stalking women throughout Ashwood and the surrounding towns. The basement door opened above me, and I heard footsteps on the stairs. I froze, my heart stopping. Daniel appeared at the bottom of the steps, still dressed in his suit from the rehearsal dinner. When he saw me at his laptop, surrounded by his wall of photographs, his face went completely blank. We stared at each other for a long moment. I waited for him to explain, to tell me this was all some terrible misunderstanding, that there was an innocent reason for all of this. But instead he just sighed heavily and rubbed his face. "Rebecca told you," he said. It wasn't a question. I couldn't speak, couldn't form words. This stranger standing in front of me wearing my son's face. I knew she'd seen it last week. Daniel came down the stairs slowly, his hands in his pockets. I'd gotten careless, Left the basement door unlocked when I ran out for a meeting. She was upset at first, but I explained everything to her. I thought she understood. Understood? My voice came out as a croak. Daniel, you've been stalking women. Installing cameras in their homes. This is sick. This is criminal. He shook his head slowly, like I was a child who didn't comprehend something simple. It's not stalking, Mom. It's research. How else am I supposed to know if someone is really right for me? People lie. They pretend to be someone they're not when you're dating them. But if you watch them when they think they're alone, you see who they really are. I thought I might vomit. This isn't normal, Daniel. This isn't how relationships work. You can't just spy on people. Why not? His voice was calm, reasonable, which somehow made it more terrifying. I'm not hurting anyone. I'm just observing. And because I observe, because I take the time to really understand women before I approach them, I can be exactly what they need. That's why my relationships work so well. That's why Rebecca fell in love with me. Because I knew exactly how to make her happy. Rebecca is terrified of you. No, she's not. Daniel smiled, and it was such a familiar smile, the same one he'd had since he was a little boy. She was shocked at first, sure. But I explained it to her. I told her how much I love her. How all of this was just my way of making sure we were compatible. She's still marrying me, isn't she? Is she? I stood up, my legs unsteady. Or is she too scared to call it off? Daniel, do you understand what you've done? These women, you've violated their privacy. You've committed crimes. You could go to prison for this. Only if someone reports me. Daniel's voice took on an edge. And who's going to do that, Mom? You? Are you really going to destroy your son's life? Send me to prison? Ruin everything I've built? I stared at him, and for the first time in my life I didn't recognize my own child. How long have you been doing this? He shrugged. Since college. I dated this girl freshman year, thought she was perfect. Then I found out she'd been cheating on me the whole time. Lying to my face while sleeping with half my dorm floor. That's when I realized you can't trust what people tell you. You have to see the truth for yourself. So you've been spying on women for almost 20 years? I prefer to think of it as being thorough. Daniel walked over to his workbench and closed the laptop. I'm good at it too. In all these years, only 2 women ever found out. One of them I convinced it was a misunderstanding, that the cameras belonged to her landlord. The other one, well, she moved away. Problem solved. My mind was reeling. Problem solved? Daniel, these women didn't consent to being watched. You installed cameras in their private spaces. This is beyond just stalking. This is sexual predation. Don't be dramatic. I never touched anyone without permission. I never broke into anyone's home except to install cameras, and I always made sure nothing was disturbed. I'm not violent. I'm not dangerous. I just like to know the truth about people. The truth about people? I was shouting now, months of pent-up tension exploding out of me. The truth is that you're sick. You need help, Daniel. Professional help. This isn't normal behavior. This isn't love or research or being thorough. This is a serious psychological disorder, and you need treatment before you hurt someone. I'm not going to hurt anyone. Daniel's voice was still maddeningly calm. And I'm not sick. I'm just more honest than most people. Everyone wants to know secrets about the people they're interested in. Everyone wishes they could see how their partner acts when they're not around. I just found a way to actually do it. No. I moved toward the stairs, needing to get out of this basement, away from these photos of stolen lives. No, Daniel. Most people don't want to violate others' privacy. Most people understand boundaries and consent. You're not being honest. You're being a predator. He grabbed my arm as I tried to pass him, not hard enough to hurt but firm enough to stop me. You can't tell anyone about this. His voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. If you do, you'll destroy my life. I'll lose Rebecca. I'll lose my business. I'll lose everything. You should lose everything. I pulled my arm free. These women deserve to know. The police deserve to know. Rebecca deserves the truth so she can make an informed decision about whether to marry you. Rebecca knows the truth and she's still marrying me. Doesn't that tell you something? It tells me she's terrified and doesn't know how to get away from you. We stood there in that horrible basement, surrounded by the evidence of years of stalking, and I realized I was looking at a stranger. The boy I'd raised was gone, if he'd ever really existed at all. Maybe this had always been inside Daniel, some fundamental brokenness that I'd missed. Or maybe something had gone wrong along the way, some trauma or influence I hadn't protected him from. Either way, I couldn't ignore what I knew now. I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen those photographs, those camera feeds, the systematic violation of dozens of women's lives. I have to go. I moved past Daniel toward the stairs. We'll talk about this later. Mom, wait. His voice stopped me halfway up. Please don't do anything rash. Think about what's at stake here. Not just for me but for you too. How will it look if your only son ends up in prison? How will you explain this to the family? To your friends? Everyone will know you raised a monster. The words hit me like a physical blow because he was right. If this came out, I would be judged too. People would wonder how I'd missed the signs. They'd speculate about what kind of mother raises a stalker. My reputation, my career, my place in the community, everything would be affected. But as I stood there on those basement stairs, I realized something important. I couldn't let fear of judgment stop me from doing what was right. Those women deserved to know they'd been violated. They deserved the chance to protect themselves, to file police reports, to seek justice. And Rebecca deserved to know she wasn't crazy for being afraid, that her instincts about Daniel were correct. I'll be thinking about it, I said carefully. And Daniel, you should be thinking too. About turning yourself in. About getting help. About trying to make amends for what you've done. I'm not turning myself in for observing people. His voice was hard now. And if you try to report me, I'll deny everything. I'll say you're having some kind of breakdown, that you're jealous of Rebecca taking me away. Who do you think people will believe? A successful businessman about to get married? Or his aging mother who's been alone too long and is acting irrationally? The threat was clear. But I didn't respond. I just climbed the rest of the stairs and walked out of that house, my entire body shaking. I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, trying to figure out what to do next. Call the police? But would they believe me? Daniel was right that he'd positioned himself well in the community. He was charming, successful, well-liked. I was just his mother, and mothers were known to be emotional and irrational about their children. Go back to the country club and find Rebecca? Convince her to call off the wedding? But what if Daniel had been telling the truth and she really was okay with what he'd done? What if she'd rationalized it somehow, convinced herself it was romantic rather than terrifying? I needed proof. Something more than just my word against Daniel's. Something the police couldn't ignore. I drove home, my mind racing. It was nearly midnight when I pulled into my driveway, but I wasn't tired. I was wired on adrenaline and fear and a growing sense of purpose. I couldn't let Daniel get away with this. I couldn't let him marry Rebecca without her fully understanding what she was getting into. And I couldn't let those other women remain unaware that their privacy had been violated. But I also couldn't do this alone. I needed help. And there was only one person who might believe me and have the resources to do something about it. I pulled out my phone and stared at the contact information for Detective Sarah Morrison. She'd been my friend for 15 years, since we'd met at a community fundraiser. She was smart, thorough, and most importantly, she'd never been charmed by Daniel the way so many other people had been. She'd always kept him at arm's length, professional but distant. At the time, I thought she was just one of those people who didn't care for kids. Now I wondered if she'd sensed something about him that I'd missed. It was too late to call tonight. But first thing tomorrow morning, I'd reach out to Sarah. I'd tell her everything I'd seen. And I'd ask her to help me figure out how to handle this situation without putting Rebecca, or those other women, at risk. As I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, I kept seeing those photographs. All those women, unaware they were being watched. And I kept thinking about Daniel as a little boy, holding my hand as we crossed the street, crying when he skinned his knee, laughing at silly jokes. Where had I gone wrong? What signs had I missed? And more importantly, what was I going to do to make this right? The wedding was in 2 days. The clock was ticking. And I had a choice to make that would change all of our lives forever. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those photographs, those camera feeds, the clinical notes Daniel had made about women's lives like they were specimens to be studied. At 4 in the morning, I gave up trying and made coffee, sitting at my kitchen table watching the sun gradually lighten the sky through my window. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Daniel. Mom, I know you're upset. Can we please talk about this rationally? I love you and I don't want this to come between us. Let me explain everything properly. Breakfast at my place? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I need time to process what I saw. I'll call you later. His response came immediately. Please don't do anything impulsive. Think about what's best for everyone involved. The implied threat was clear. He was warning me to stay quiet to protect his secrets. Part of me, the part that had raised him and loved him for 33 years, wanted to believe there was some way to fix this quietly. To get Daniel into therapy, to help him understand why his behavior was wrong, to somehow undo the damage without destroying his life completely. But the other part of me, the part that kept seeing those terrified women on those camera feeds, knew that wasn't an option. Daniel had been doing this for years. He'd perfected his system. He felt no remorse, only annoyance at being discovered. He wasn't going to change because I asked him nicely. At 7 o'clock, I called Sarah Morrison. She answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. Patricia, what's wrong? Is everything okay? I need to talk to you. In person. It's urgent. There must have been something in my voice because Sarah didn't ask any more questions. Give me an hour. Meet me at the cafe on Riverside Drive. The cafe was nearly empty when I arrived. Just a few early morning regulars getting their coffee before work. Sarah was already there, sitting in a corner booth, her detective's eyes scanning the room habitually before settling on me. She was in her mid-40s, with short auburn hair and sharp features that rarely smiled but somehow conveyed warmth anyway. You look terrible, she said bluntly as I slid into the booth across from her. I feel terrible. I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup the waitress had automatically brought me. Sarah, I need to tell you something about Daniel. Something that's going to be very hard to hear. I watched her face carefully as I explained what I'd found in the basement. The photographs, the cameras, the years of systematic stalking. Sarah's expression remained neutral, professional, but I could see the tension building in her shoulders. How many women? She asked when I finished. I don't know exactly. Dozens at least. Maybe more. The laptop had folders going back years. And Rebecca knows about this? According to Daniel, yes. He claims he explained it to her and she accepted it. But Sarah, you should have seen her face when she warned me. She's terrified. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing. This is serious, Patricia. If what you're telling me is accurate, Daniel has committed multiple felonies. Breaking and entering, illegal surveillance, stalking. We're talking about significant prison time. I know. My voice cracked. I know what this means. But Sarah, those women deserve to know. And Rebecca, she can't marry him. Not without understanding the full scope of what he's done. Have you documented any of this? Photos of the basement? Screenshots from the laptop? I shook my head, feeling foolish. I was too shocked. I just needed to get out of there. All right. Sarah pulled out her phone and started typing notes. Here's what we need to do. First, I need to see that basement myself. But I can't get a warrant based solely on your testimony. Especially since you're his mother, and you technically entered his home without his knowledge of your intent to investigate. So what do? We need Rebecca to file a complaint. If she's a victim of Daniel's surveillance, if he installed cameras to watch her before they were in a relationship, then she has standing to report the crime. Once we have her formal complaint, I can get a warrant to search the property. But what if she won't? What if Daniel has convinced her to stay quiet? Then we have a problem. Sarah's voice was grim. Without a complaint from a victim or probable cause, my hands are tied. Daniel could destroy all the evidence before we can legally access it. I thought about Rebecca's face at the rehearsal dinner, the way her hands had trembled, the fear in her eyes. She wants help, Sarah. I'm sure of it. She just doesn't know how to ask for it. All right. Can you arrange a meeting with her? Somewhere Daniel won't know about? I need to talk to her directly. Assess whether she's willing to cooperate with an investigation. The wedding is tomorrow. Time is running out. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I know this is hard, Patricia. I can't imagine what you're going through. But you're doing the right thing. Those women need someone to advocate for them. And right now, you're the only one who knows the truth. After I left the cafe, I sat in my car trying to figure out how to contact Rebecca without Daniel knowing. I couldn't call her cell phone. For all I knew, Daniel was monitoring her communications. I needed to reach her in person somewhere he wouldn't be. Then I remembered. Rebecca had mentioned during our wedding planning that she had a final dress fitting scheduled for this morning at the bridal boutique downtown. She'd invited me to come, but I declined, saying I wanted to be surprised when I saw her walk down the aisle. The irony of that memory made me feel sick. There wasn't going to be any walking down the aisle. Not if I had anything to say about it. The bridal boutique was called Enchanted Moments, a upscale shop with white silk curtains in the windows and soft classical music playing inside. A young woman with a clipboard greeted me as I entered. I'm here to see Rebecca Chen. I'm her future mother-in-law. Oh yes, Miss Chen is in the back with our seamstress. Let me see if she's available. It's important. Please tell her Patricia needs to speak with her privately. The young woman looked uncertain but disappeared through a curtain. A moment later Rebecca emerged, still in her street clothes, her face pale. Patricia, what are you doing here? We need to talk. Somewhere Daniel won't overhear. Is there a private room we can use? Rebecca glanced back toward the fitting rooms, then at the front door, as if checking to make sure Daniel hadn't followed me. The owner lets me use her office sometimes. This way. The office was small and cluttered with fabric swatches and wedding magazines. Rebecca closed the door behind us and leaned against it, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. You went to his house. It wasn't a question. I saw the basement. Everything you warned me about. Rebecca, we need to talk about what happens next. She closed her eyes. I know what you're thinking. That I should call off the wedding, report him to the police, do the right thing. But it's not that simple. Tell me what happened when you found the basement last week. Rebecca sank into the chair behind the desk, and the story came tumbling out. She'd gone back to Daniel's house to retrieve her phone, let herself in with her key, heard sounds from the basement. When she'd gone down to investigate, she'd seen everything I'd seen. The photographs, the notes, the camera feeds. I confronted him immediately. Her voice was hollow. I was hysterical, screaming, threatening to call the police. And Daniel, he just stayed calm. So eerily calm. He sat me down and explained his whole philosophy about relationships, about how you can't really know someone unless you observe them in private. Did he threaten you? Not directly. But Patricia, he knew things. Things about me that he shouldn't have known. He told me about a conversation I'd had with my sister 3 months ago, in my apartment when I thought I was alone. He quoted things I'd said word for word. He knew about the doubts I'd had about our relationship, the fears I'd shared with my therapist over video calls that I made from my home office. Rebecca's hands were shaking as she continued. He'd been watching me for 2 years before we even met. He knew my schedule, my preferences, my vulnerabilities. When we had our first conversation at that conference, it wasn't chance. He'd orchestrated the whole thing, made sure he was staying at the same hotel, arranged to be in the same seminar sessions, even requested the seat next to mine at the opening dinner. So your entire relationship was built on his surveillance. Everything I thought was fate or compatibility or us just clicking, it was all manufactured. He'd studied me like a lab rat, and then presented himself as my perfect match because he already knew exactly what I was looking for. I felt rage building in my chest, hot and fierce. Rebecca, you have to report this. You have to tell the police what he's done. She looked at me with eyes full of despair. And say what? That my fiancé is really good at research? That he learned about me before asking me out? He'll frame it as romantic. He'll say he was just nervous and wanted to make a good impression. His lawyer will tear me apart. But the cameras, the breaking and entering to install them, that's illegal regardless of his motivation. Is it? Rebecca's laugh was bitter. Daniel explained that too. The cameras in my apartment, he had the landlord's permission to install them. Apparently he's been paying my landlord under the table for years, told him it was a security system to protect his girlfriend. The landlord thought he was being a caring partner. That's still illegal surveillance. You didn't consent. But I did consent. 3 months ago, when Daniel suggested we install security cameras in my apartment after there was a break-in in my building, I signed the paperwork. I had no idea the cameras had been there for years already. As far as any legal record shows, I gave permission. I felt like I was suffocating. Daniel had been so careful, so thorough in covering his tracks. What about the other women? The ones whose photos are in his basement? Rebecca shook her head. I asked him about them. He said most of those were old interests from years ago, that he'd moved on. He claimed the only active surveillance he has now is on me, and only because he loves me and wants to keep me safe. You don't believe that? Of course I don't believe it. But Patricia, I'm trapped. If I report him, it's my word against his. And he has documentation that I consented to the cameras. If I call off the wedding, I'll have to explain why to my family, my friends, everyone who's invested time and money into this event. And Daniel, she paused, swallowing hard. Daniel has made it clear that if I embarrass him by canceling the wedding, he'll make sure everyone knows intimate details about my life. Things he learned from watching me. Private things that would humiliate me. He's blackmailing you. He calls it protecting our relationship. Rebecca wiped tears from her cheeks. He says if I just go through with the wedding, everything will be fine. He'll remove the cameras now that we're getting married and living together. He says he only needed them when we were apart to feel close to me. And you believe him? No. But I also don't see a way out that doesn't destroy my life. At least if I marry him, I can try to manage the situation. Maybe get him into therapy. Maybe gradually convince him that what he's doing is wrong. Or maybe he escalates. Maybe the surveillance gets worse. Maybe he starts monitoring your every move inside your marriage. Rebecca, you can't marry someone who has this kind of control over you. She looked at me with hollow eyes. What choice do I have? I thought about Sarah waiting for Rebecca's complaint, about those other women in Daniel's photographs who had no idea they'd been violated, about the life Rebecca would have if she went through with this marriage. And I made a decision. You have a choice. I pulled out my phone. I have a friend who's a detective. She's waiting to hear from us. If you file a formal complaint about the surveillance, she can get a warrant to search Daniel's house. We can expose everything he's done, not just to you but to all those other women. They deserve to know, Rebecca. But his lawyer, the evidence he has showing I consented. Sarah's good at her job. She'll find the holes in his story. And more importantly, once the police start investigating, they'll find the other women. The ones who definitely didn't consent. Daniel can't have gotten permission from all of them. His whole system will unravel. Rebecca was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. If I do this, my life falls apart. The wedding is canceled. My family will have questions. Everyone at my firm will find out. I'll be the woman who almost married a stalker. If you don't do this, you marry a man who has been systematically violating your privacy for years, who has blackmail material on you, who sees you as a possession to be monitored and controlled. Rebecca, I've been a nurse for 35 years. I've seen women in abusive relationships. This is abuse. It's psychological abuse, and it will only get worse after you're married. I watched emotions play across Rebecca's face. Fear, anger, resignation, and finally something that looked like determination. Okay. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Okay, I'll do it. I'll file the complaint. But Patricia, you need to understand something. When this comes out, Daniel is going to hate both of us. He's going to feel betrayed. And I don't know what he'll do when he feels cornered. The warning sent a chill down my spine. Do you think he's dangerous? Physically dangerous? I don't know. I never thought he was capable of any of this. So clearly my judgment about what he's capable of is pretty flawed. I called Sarah and arranged for her to meet us at the police station. Rebecca canceled her dress fitting, claiming a family emergency. As we walked to my car, I saw her hands shaking. Thank you, she said quietly, for believing me, for not trying to explain away what he's done or convince me I'm overreacting. You're not overreacting. What Daniel has done is monstrous, and I'm sorry I raised someone capable of this. You didn't know. Parents can't control who their children become. But I should have seen signs. I should have noticed something was wrong. Rebecca stopped walking and turned to face me. Patricia, he fooled me completely. He fooled my friends, my family, my colleagues. He's exceptionally good at hiding who he really is. You can't blame yourself for that. At the police station, Sarah met us in a private interview room. She was all business, recording Rebecca's statement, asking detailed questions about when Rebecca had discovered the cameras, what Daniel had said, what evidence existed in the basement. The laptop is the key, Sarah said. If we can access his files before he has a chance to delete anything, we'll have documentation of years of illegal surveillance. But we need to move fast. Patricia, when did Daniel last see you? Last night around 10:30. And does he know you might report this? He suspects. He sent me a text this morning asking me not to do anything impulsive. Sarah swore softly. Then he's probably already taking precautions. Backing up files to remote servers, maybe even starting to delete evidence. We need that warrant now. She stepped out of the room to make calls, leaving Rebecca and me alone. Rebecca looked smaller somehow, hunched in her chair. The confident architect I'd come to know replaced by someone fragile and frightened. What happens after this? She asked. After you arrest him? He'll be charged, there will be a trial, and if he's convicted he'll go to prison. Sarah's voice came from the doorway as she returned. But I need to be honest with you both. Cases like this are complicated. Defense attorneys will argue about consent, about reasonable expectations of privacy, about whether surveillance in someone's own home crosses the line into criminal behavior. Daniel clearly thinks he's covered his legal bases. But he broke into those women's homes to install cameras. That's breaking and entering at minimum. True. And if we can prove that, we have him. But we need the physical evidence. The cameras, the installation equipment, anything that shows he accessed these properties illegally. How long will it take to get the warrant? I'm pulling strings. Should have it within a few hours. But in the meantime, we have another problem. The wedding is tomorrow. Guests are traveling in. Vendors are preparing. What's the plan for handling that? Rebecca closed her eyes. I need to call my parents. Tell them everything. They're going to be devastated. I'll help you. I reached for her hand. We'll get through this together. Sarah looked between us. I know this is difficult, but I need to prepare you both for what's coming. Once we execute this warrant and Daniel is arrested, the media will likely pick up the story. Multiple victims, years of surveillance, a prominent businessman, this is going to be news. You'll both need to be ready for scrutiny. The thought made me feel sick. Neighbors I'd known for decades asking questions. Friends at the hospital whispering. Everyone wondering how I'd failed to notice my own son was a predator. But then I thought about those women in the photographs. The ones who had no idea their most private moments had been stolen. They deserve justice more than I deserve to protect my reputation. Whatever it takes, I said firmly. We do whatever it takes to stop him. Sarah nodded approvingly. All right. Rebecca, I need you to stay here and work with one of our victim advocates to prepare your full statement. Patricia, I need you to come with me. We're going to go get that warrant and then we're going to pay your son a visit. My stomach churned at the thought of facing Daniel again. What if he tries to destroy evidence while we're waiting for the warrant? We'll have surveillance on his house within the hour. If he tries to leave with boxes or computer equipment, we'll know. And what do I do? Rebecca's voice was small. Just sit here and wait? You call your family. You tell them the wedding is off. And you start thinking about the other women who might be victims. Anyone Daniel dated before you, anyone he showed unusual interest in. We'll need to track them down and inform them. After Rebecca left with the victim advocate, Sarah and I sat in her office while she worked on expediting the warrant. I watched her type, make calls, coordinate with other officers, and felt useless. Patricia, Sarah said without looking up from her computer. You did the right thing coming to me. I know this doesn't feel like it right now, but you potentially saved Rebecca from years of abuse. Maybe saved her life. You think he would have killed her? I think men who need that level of control over women are unpredictable. Maybe he would have been content just watching. Or maybe one day she would have tried to leave. And he would have felt he had no choice but to stop her permanently. We'll never know now because you intervened. The warrant came through at 2 in the afternoon. Sarah assembled a team of 4 officers, plus a digital forensics specialist to handle the computer evidence. I rode with Sarah, my hands clenched so tightly in my lap that my knuckles were white. You don't have to come, Sarah said gently. You can wait at the station. He's still my son. I need to be there. Daniel's house looked peaceful in the afternoon sunlight, the Victorian's gingerbread trim casting intricate shadows across the lawn. There were wedding decorations already being delivered, white chairs stacked on the porch, boxes of flowers waiting to be arranged. The wedding was supposed to take place in the backyard tomorrow, under a tent that had been set up early this morning. All of this was going to be cancelled, dismantled, explained away. And it was my fault. Except it wasn't my fault. It was Daniel's fault for the choices he'd made. Sarah knocked on the door. We could hear movement inside, footsteps approaching. Daniel opened the door, still dressed in business casual from work, And his face went through a series of expressions when he saw me standing behind the police officers. Surprise, then understanding, then something cold and hard. Daniel Thornton? Sarah held up her badge. I'm Detective Sarah Morrison. We have a warrant to search your property. A warrant for what? Daniel's voice was calm, but I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Illegal surveillance, stalking, breaking and entering. Sarah handed him the paperwork. Step aside, please. I'd like to call my lawyer. That's your right. But we're executing this warrant whether your lawyer is here or not. Daniel looked at me over Sarah's shoulder. Mom, you actually did it. You actually called the police on your own son. I did what I had to do to protect innocent people. Innocent people? Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. Those women are fine. I never touched them. I never threatened them. I just watched. You violated their privacy. You broke into their homes. You stalked them for years. I loved them. Each one of them. I was trying to understand them, to know them truly. How is that a crime? Sarah stepped between us. Mr. Thornton, I strongly suggest you call that lawyer now. And I need you to surrender any electronic devices you have on your person. Daniel pulled out his phone, and I saw his thumb moving rapidly across the screen. Deleting evidence, I realized. He was trying to delete files remotely. Sarah saw it too. Give me the phone. Now. Daniel smiled and handed it over. Too late, detective. Everything important is already backed up to servers you'll never access. My lawyer is very thorough about protecting my business interests. We'll see about that. Sarah handed the phone to the forensic specialist and gestured to her team. Search everything. I want the basement thoroughly documented. Every photograph, every camera, every note. This is going to be airtight. I watched as officers moved through Daniel's house, gloved hands opening drawers and closets, documenting everything they found. Daniel stood in his living room, arms crossed, watching with that same eerie calm. He looked at me once and the contempt in his eyes made me flinch. You've destroyed my life, he said quietly. I hope you're happy. You destroyed your own life. You destroyed dozens of women's sense of safety. You destroyed Rebecca's trust. All I did was refuse to help you hide it anymore. Detective Morrison appeared at the top of the basement stairs, her face grim. Patricia, you need to see this. I followed her down to the basement and my heart sank. The walls were bare. Every photograph had been removed. The workbench was empty except for some basic tools. The laptop was gone. He knew we were coming, Sarah said. He's been systematically removing evidence all day. But how? How did he know we'd get the warrant so quickly? Because I know how the system works. Daniel had followed us down the stairs, 2 officers flanking him. I knew that as soon as Rebecca filed a complaint, you'd push for an expedited warrant. So I've been preparing since you left my house last night, Mom. Backing up files, removing physical evidence, covering my tracks. You can't have gotten rid of everything. Sarah's voice was hard. We'll find something. Good luck with that. My lawyer is already on his way. And I think you'll find that any evidence you do manage to discover will be inadmissible due to improper search procedures. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she didn't take the bait. Keep searching, she ordered her team. Check the walls for hidden compartments. Look for loose floorboards. If he removed the photographs, they're somewhere. For 3 hours they searched that house. They found nothing. The basement was clean, almost obsessively so. There were no hidden cameras, no surveillance equipment, no photographs, no notes. It was as if the room I'd seen last night had never existed. Finally, Sarah pulled me aside. He's good. Really good. Without physical evidence, we're going to have a hard time making charges stick. But Rebecca's testimony, what I saw last night. Your testimony won't be enough without corroborating evidence. You're his mother. A defense attorney will argue you're biased, that you misunderstood what you saw, that you're trying to sabotage his happiness for personal reasons. So he's just going to get away with this? I didn't say that. Sarah looked at Daniel, who was now on the phone with his lawyer, looking entirely too satisfied with himself. We've seized his phone and computer. Our forensics team is excellent. If there's any recoverable data, they'll find it. And we're going to start tracking down the other victims, interviewing them, building a pattern of behavior. But in the meantime, he's free to go. We don't have enough for an arrest. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. After everything, after Rebecca's courage in coming forward, after the risk of reporting my own son, Daniel was going to walk away. Don't look so defeated, detective. Daniel ended his call and walked over to us. My lawyer says you had no probable cause for this warrant. Any evidence you did find would be thrown out. But since you didn't find anything anyway, I guess it doesn't matter. There's still the matter of Miss Chen's complaint. Yes, Rebecca. Daniel shook his head sadly. My poor fiancée has been under a lot of stress with the wedding planning. I think she may have had a bit of a breakdown. I'm hoping after some rest, she'll realize she's made some very serious false accusations. She's not going to marry you. I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Rebecca knows what you are now. She's done. We'll see. Daniel turned to me, and his voice dropped to a whisper only I could hear. You think you've won, Mom. You think you've saved Rebecca and those other women. But all you've done is make yourself irrelevant. I don't have a mother anymore. As far as I'm concerned, you died tonight. The words hurt more than I'd expected. Even knowing what he was, even seeing the monster behind the mask, some part of me still wanted him to be the little boy I'd raised. Still wanted to believe there was something redeemable in him. But that little boy was gone. Maybe he'd never really existed at all. Sarah and her team left Daniel's house empty-handed. I rode back to the station in silence, watching the familiar streets of Ashwood pass by, and wondering how everything had fallen apart so completely. At the station, Rebecca was waiting with her parents. Her mother had clearly been crying, mascara streaked down her face. Her father looked shell-shocked. When they saw me, Rebecca's mother rushed over. Is it true? What Rebecca told us about Daniel? I'm afraid so. I couldn't meet her eyes. I'm so sorry. If I'd known, if I'd seen any signs. This isn't your fault. Rebecca's father put a hand on my shoulder. Patricia, you did the right thing by reporting this. Even if they couldn't find evidence tonight. We're still building the case. Sarah joined us, her professional mask in place. I've contacted the FBI's Cybercrimes Division. They have resources we don't for tracking digital evidence. And we're going to start interviewing women who appear in the photographs Patricia saw, the ones we were able to identify. What about the wedding? Rebecca's voice was hoarse from crying. All those people coming tomorrow. We've already started making calls. Rebecca's mother squeezed her daughter's hand. Canceling everything. We told everyone there was a family emergency. They're going to want details eventually. Rebecca looked at me. Everyone's going to want to know why. Then we tell them the truth. I took her hand. We tell them that Daniel isn't the man we thought he was. That you discovered something that made the marriage impossible. We don't owe anyone more explanation than that. But people will talk. They'll speculate. Let them. Sarah's voice was firm. You're the victim here, Rebecca. Don't let anyone make you feel ashamed for protecting yourself. We spent another hour at the station going over next steps, planning how to handle the fallout. Then Rebecca's parents took her home, and I was left standing in the parking lot with Sarah, the weight of the day finally catching up with me. Go home, Patricia. Get some rest. This isn't over, not by a long shot. We'll find evidence. Daniel can't have erased everything. But what if he did? What if he really is that good at covering his tracks? Then we'll catch him making new mistakes. Men like Daniel, they can't help themselves. He'll need that sense of control again. He'll slip up. And when he does, we'll be watching. I drove home through streets I'd traveled thousands of times, past houses where friends and neighbors lived, past the hospital where I'd worked for decades, past the church where I'd taken Daniel when he was a boy. Everything looked the same, but I felt like I was seeing my town through new eyes. How many other secrets were hidden behind these familiar facades? How many other monsters were living normal lives, hiding in plain sight? My house felt empty and cold when I let myself in. I sat at the kitchen table where I'd raised Daniel, where we'd done homework and eaten breakfast and talked about his hopes and dreams. Had any of it been real? Or had I been living with a stranger all these years, loving someone who didn't actually exist? My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You should have stayed out of it, Mom. Now you'll see what happens to people who betray me. I stared at the message, my hands shaking. Was Daniel threatening me? Or was this just more psychological warfare, trying to scare me into backing down? I forwarded the message to Sarah and then did something I should have done hours ago. I called a locksmith and had all my locks changed. If Daniel still had a key to my house, he wasn't getting in. As I waited for the locksmith to arrive, I thought about Rebecca, about how brave she'd been in filing that complaint, about the other women whose names I'd seen in that basement, women who had no idea they'd been violated, about the long road ahead of us, trying to build a case against someone who had spent years perfecting the art of not getting caught. The wedding was supposed to happen tomorrow. Instead, there would be police interviews, evidence collection, phone calls to devastated friends and family members trying to explain the unexplainable. There would be whispers and speculation and probably judgment directed at both Rebecca and me. But there would also be the truth finally out in the open. And maybe eventually there would be justice. My son was a monster. But I was going to make sure he didn't hurt anyone else ever again. Even if it cost me everything. 3 months later, I stood in a courtroom watching my son being sentenced to 15 years in prison. The FBI had found everything. Daniel thought he'd been clever, backing up his files to encrypted servers, but he'd underestimated how determined Sarah and her team would be. They'd tracked down 23 women he'd surveilled over the years. 19 of them agreed to testify. The trial had been brutal. Daniel's lawyer tried every trick, arguing consent and privacy laws and reasonable expectations. But the prosecution had built an airtight case. They'd found the equipment he'd used to install cameras. They'd recovered deleted files showing years of systematic stalking. They'd presented testimony from landlords he'd bribed and electronics store employees, who remembered him buying surveillance gear. Rebecca testified for 3 hours, detailing how Daniel had manipulated her entire relationship based on stolen information. She was incredible on the stand, strong and clear-eyed, refusing to be intimidated by the defense attorney's attempts to paint her as a willing participant. I testified too about finding the basement, about Daniel's complete lack of remorse when confronted. The defense tried to discredit me as a bitter mother seeking revenge, but the jury saw through it. When the verdict came back guilty on all counts, I felt no satisfaction. Just a deep, exhausting sadness. My son would spend the next 15 years in prison. His business was destroyed. His reputation was ruined. And I had been the one to set it all in motion. But I'd also saved Rebecca from a nightmare marriage. I'd given those other women answers about why they'd felt watched, why their most private moments had somehow seemed less private. I'd stopped Daniel from hurting anyone else. After the sentencing, Rebecca found me in the hallway outside the courtroom. We didn't speak, just held each other for a long moment. She'd become like a daughter to me over these months. Someone who understood the unique pain of loving someone who turned out to be a monster. My friends at the hospital had been supportive mostly. There were whispers, of course, questions about what kind of mother I'd been. But my real friend stood by me, reminded me that I couldn't have known, that some people are just broken in ways that don't show. I sold my house and moved to a smaller place across town. Too many memories in the old neighborhood, too many people who looked at me with pity or suspicion. I kept working, kept living, kept trying to find meaning in the wreckage. Rebecca went back to her architecture firm. She's dating again now, taking it slow, learning to trust. She calls me once a week and we have lunch every month. We're building something new from the ashes of what Daniel destroyed. Not quite mother and daughter, but family nonetheless. The kind you choose rather than the kind you're born into. Daniel writes me letters from prison. I don't read them. Sarah says I should save them as evidence in case he threatens anyone, but so far they've all been returned unopened. Maybe someday I'll be ready to hear what he has to say. But not yet. Not while the wounds are still so fresh. I think about those women in the photographs sometimes. The ones who testified and the ones who couldn't face it. I think about how violated they must have felt, learning that their most private moments had been stolen. And I'm grateful that I had the courage to report what I saw, even though it cost me my son. Because in the end I didn't lose a son. I lost an illusion. The real Daniel, the one who could stalk women for years without remorse, that person was never really mine to begin with. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.